Well, hey everybody, Rowan Dredge here. I am really excited about this live, and I've got with me from what used to be Brisbane, Australia, but now Boston, Massachusetts, Martin Moore. Martin, how are you?
Hey, Rowan, I'm fantastic, mate. It's great to be here. Thank you very much for having me on.
I am excited, and as we've talked about leading up to today and just before, as soon as I got the opportunity to have this conversation with you, I jumped at it because I've been a fan of the No Bullshit Leadership podcast. I appreciate the way you think about both the soft skills and the hard skills of leadership, or attributes and competencies, as you call them. And I really wanted to have this conversation. So thank you so much.
Pleasure, mate. Pleasure.
Right out of the gate, I wanted to just pick up this really clever distinction that you've got around the role of leadership. And you say that the role or the purpose of leadership is to deliver value. And sometimes you follow that up with, some people get a little bit uncomfortable about this.
Totally.
I'd love to hear right from the get-go. You've got a very strong conviction about it. You've got a lot of history in your corporate experience with it. It served you well. What is it, and why does it matter to you so much, this idea?
Well, it's a great place to start, Rowan, because this is central to pretty much everything you do as a leader. You're there to create value, full stop. That's it. That's why you're there. Now, before everyone rails against me for being a heartless capitalist bastard, which I'm not, I got a bit of that running through my veins, but not too much. Value can come in all different shapes and sizes and all different forms. So when we use the word value, everyone automatically thinks of financial value. And yes, that's important. It doesn't matter whether you're, a listed company or a not-for-profit organization. You don't have money, you don't survive. That's it. So you do have to have that. That's important. But think about if you're running a surgical practice. What creates value for your business might be better post-operative outcomes for patients. If you're the principal of a school, value to you might be having a higher percentage of your students matriculating to the university or college degree that they aspire to. So there are all different ways to manage value. And even if you are a not-for-profit working in the care sector, if you don't make your organization as efficient as you possibly can, you are robbing the people that you're trying to serve. That's what's happening. And so this is why, to me, it's so central, because no matter what your context, value is at the heart of everything. And it's a leader's job to understand that value and then to go after that. Now, I know this is a long answer, but you've got me going already. Let me just go to the. let me just go to.
I've got more questions about it. So carry on.
I just want to do that. I just want to do the part B to that. Is that once you understand what creates value, one of the hardest things you can possibly attempt to do as a leader is to stop all the other shit that goes on in your organization.
Wow.
And we know that, my favorite quote from Peter Drucker, which is, the greatest waste of corporate resources is to do excellently those things that you shouldn't do at all.
Wow.
That really says it, doesn't it? Like, we spend so much time, energy, and money doing things that probably aren't material in the scheme of things.
So I really wanted to get out of the blocks on this conversation, because I think it's got a really pointy end, because there's a part of this idea of going, no, stop. Let's start from the premise that your job is to deliver value. Because what I hear in that is, and this is going to be interesting with the work that you do with leaders and organizations, and that is, how well do we know how to articulate that value? How well do we know how to make sense of what that value proposition is for us as a business? What's been your experience with leaders when you ask them that question? By and large, do we know it? Is it something we're sharp on? And what process do you use to get us really clear and confident about that?
Yes, and this is really where the rubber meets the road, Rowan, because in most organizations at the highest levels, they understand reasonably well what the value drivers are. Some more than others, but the larger the organization, the more difficult it is to get uniformity of that concept throughout the organization. Now, I talk about the dilution principle, and that says for a CEO, and I was once a CEO of a large organization where I knew with extreme clarity what our strategy was, what our purpose was, and why every day when we came into the organization, we knew what to do to drive that value. But going even one layer down and listening to my direct reports senior executives who are extremely capable and competent and experienced talk about it, they don't talk about it quite the same way. They don't quite understand it as well as I do, because most of it's been formulated in my head with maybe the help of, you know, one or two executives and presented to board. And the board, of course, has their two bobs worth. So when you're trying to describe the value strategy, every layer you go down, you experience a little bit of dilution. And as it's diluted, sometimes I'd be on the front line talking to a team down there and asking the frontline supervisor or team leader what they thought was driving value for the organization. And as they're telling me, I'm trying not to look apoplectic about what they're telling me, because it's completely the opposite of what I think they should be doing. And so the difficulty in communicating is that you will get that dilution and you will get that lack of understanding at each point further away you get from the corner office. That's just the way it is.
Yeah. So with that in mind, again, and I want to labour on this one, because I will go on record as saying I'm in alignment with what you're saying. I'm interested to know, do you use the word value, results, outcomes, deliverables? Do you use them synonymously, or do you prefer value because of the distinction you get to make? It depends what value means to you as an organisation. What are your thoughts on that?
I tend to use it. I tend to use those terms interchangeably, but only because it's premised on the fact that you've understood value. And once you understand value, then you drive for results and outcomes and the other things that fall off the back end of it. So it's really, So I could use value all the time, but you know, once you're down in the bowels of the organisation, you talk about, right, here are the outcomes we've agreed we're going to achieve. Here are the results that we need to post. So I use them fairly interchangeably on the assumption that we know what value is.
But again, what I'm hearing is that that is in some ways the tip of the iceberg, because the follow-up question is then, okay, what does everybody understand value to be in the organisation? What do we say when we talk about delivering value in the organisation? How do we stay refined or aligned so the CEO doesn't go apoplectic on us? And what do we do? How might it go off track, and what do we do to bring it back on track? Now, I'd like to use you as a case study on this one because of that stellar part of your career in the energy sector, where you grew CS Energy from 18 million to 441 million. Now, I'm imagining that you forged some of these ideas in these environments. So what did that look like in that environment? I mean, it was a distributed team. You're in all over different parts of power stations and various other industrial environments. How did you do it? What did you do to make it crystal clear, as deep as you could go? And what did you do to bring it back on track when it went off track?
Right. So there's probably a couple of misconceptions here, Rowan, that I should clear up. There was never a point in time where the whole organisation was on track, ever.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So, and this is,
I love it. It's like the steering wheel principle. Yep. You're always holding it. And
It totally is. And culturally, there were parts of the organization that really, you know, didn't move from, you know, the dark ages where they were in my 5-year tenure there. Interestingly, and importantly, that figure you quoted, the 18 million to 441 million, that was the earnings. So that was at the EBITDA line. And at the same time, we had our revenue increasing. But basically what we did was to become much more focused on commercial outcomes. Now, I was coming off a pretty low base, that's obvious. And coming into an organization like CS Energy, where it had been driven for many, many years by engineers, not commercial people, bringing in that overlay of, okay, you guys are good at what you do, and we understand that, but now we've got to do that in a way that we use it for good rather than evil. And I say that sort of flippantly, of course, but to use it in a way that isn't engineering for its own sake, or isn't, you know, trading for its own sake. It's, how do we optimize this? Because the bottom line is, here are the things we need to do to create value. So instead of running a piece of equipment to failure, how do we actually maintain it better so that we can predictively maintain it so that it doesn't fail, and that it's cheaper and better and has a longer life? So how do we actually start thinking about doing those things better? How do we actually make the environment as safe as we possibly can for our people, so that we don't get those disruptions that occur when people are injured? And of course, just for the moral, reality of making sure that you have your duty of care to keep people safe.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then, for some of the bigger commercial issues that were there, we had one or two major commercial issues that were really a dead weight on the company, that was sort of the lead in our saddlebags, and we solved those with some smart commercial structuring of how we manage to turn around some of these deals. And those things just liberate you. And so if you know the things that are really going to pull those big levers of value, and you go and pull those, that's how you go to victory. But you've got to forget about everything else. There was, when I left, there were still 1,000 things that needed to be done to make the company better, and some which were probably quite urgent. But in the scheme of things, they just weren't as important as the things that we did work on, which liberated the value. And so it's knowing and understanding that relativity is really important. And you'll only do that by having an executive team that you can bring together, and the people below them in their teams who can thrash out these constructive tensions to work out, where the balances are going to be.
Fantastic. Yeah. I always use a metaphor with strategic development with people. When we identify what the strategic issues are, and let's just say I've got a cut artery and a broken leg. I said, don't wheel me out of the ER with my leg in a cast, but I bled out. Like, don't do that to me. Don't do that to the organization. And you're quoted as saying, and I'll pick this up. I'll bring this idea up a little earlier. You're quoted as saying we had a knowing culture, not a learning culture. And yes. I was fascinated by that one, because you just mentioned that one of the ways you actually changed, I think, was actually changing the mindset of the way we approached our work, and you led people through that change. So that idea of a knowing culture and not a learning culture, how did you shift from one to the other, and then therefore saw the benefit of it?
Well, that's a really good question, because the shift is very slow and it happens in pockets. And this is one of these things that takes constant energy and commitment from leaders throughout the levels. And at any point in time, I get the sense that I might have had 1/3 of the total leadership of the organization actually on board and driving it at the most at any point in time. So you're sort of fighting against apathy to a large extent. The thing about a lot of industries is they fall into the bad habit of believing that knowledge is power. And particularly in an industry where it's what I know that makes me valuable. And if I know more than the next person, then I'm more valuable than the next person. And so it creates all sorts of problems, like unwillingness to share knowledge, siloed mentality in terms of the disciplines that people work in. I'm only working in this discipline, you're working in that discipline, so we don't stay connected and share information that way. And so there are lots of reasons why any sort of lateral movement tends to cease, and the challenging stops. And when you stop challenging, you stop learning. And it's the curiosity and the challenge and the constantly asking questions, why? Like, what's the point of that? And explain that to me better. And why don't we do it this way? If you don't have that sort of healthy learning curiosity, then the organization becomes stagnant very quickly and you'll get left behind. Now, our industry was relatively slow moving in that regard, in those terms, but the environment around us was changing very, very rapidly with the introduction of renewable energy. And so I think the organization at the point that I came in 2013 was sort of in a situation where they were stuck between, they were in limbo. They were stuck between a very predictable industry they had for a long time and a very rapidly emerging change to that industry, and really didn't know where to move to. And so making the business fit to move into that new world when you could see the threats that were coming from competitors was one of the key things that we had to do. Now, I'm absolutely unsure of what question you asked. I know I was having a good conversation.
No, I love it. I asked you about that because you picked up in the conversation around value, you picked up an idea that in preparing for this conversation, I heard you say we had a knowing culture, not a learning culture. And again, I saw that as a key point of difference around senior executives, C-suites, senior leaders going, hang on a minute. We need to give up the idea that we know, and we need to embrace the idea that we need to be more curious.
Absolutely.
And you ask the questions why. And so,
absolutely.
But I've observed that probably as a value that you carry by going, hang on a minute. And you've said it yourself. Look, there was lots I didn't do. There was 1,000 things that were left unfinished. we did deliver on a couple of these big levers, which I just appreciate the humility around that. And so that was that. So was there any other comment around that knowing culture versus learning culture?
Yeah,
what is
thanks.
it?
Thanks for the segue, Rowan. You reminded me of the example I was going to use. You've got to change this, a little bit at a time. And because people aren't used to that sort of a culture, then coming in and just talking to them and trying to explain what's going on, it's like trying to explain color to a blind person. It's almost impossible to let them know what you want. And so the only way to do that is by having counterexamples that you set up. All right, here's the way we used to do it. Here's the way we're going to do it. Here's what good looks like. I've got to be able to show you what good looks like so that you know what you're trying to achieve. Otherwise, it's sort of quite cruel to say you've got to be different and then show them exactly how. So bringing in people who understand and have that right culture already and can role model that. And you can just say, hey, look at Jenny. See her? Do more of that. Right? That's what I'm after, is that. So there's a place for that. But also there are things like fundamentally changing the way people look at problems. Now, I remember the very first investment request that came over my desk as CEO. I'd only been there for a couple of weeks. And it was probably maybe just shy of 200-page business case. And it had about 25 signatures on the front of all the people who'd endorsed it. And I read through this business case, and I called in the executive who was accountable and the guy who'd written the business case. And I said, nice work. You've put a lot of effort into this, I can tell. And clearly, you've got your ducks lined up because of the 25 signatures on the front. Here's the problem. Of the 3 things I want to know to make a smart commercial investment, none of that's in there, in that 200 pages. The things that are most important for me to know about risk and reward and the likelihood of certain things happening, and when we think we're going to get a payback period and what our other alternatives are to that thing that you've proposed, I'm none the wiser. The second thing is, of all the signatures I'd like to see, the 2 that I want aren't there. I want to have a chief commercial officer who understands those things and can actually say, I think this is the best commercial option we can actually go for in terms of our risk reward scenario. And I want a legal opinion. I want to make sure that this contract we're about to sign with our supplier is actually, it passes muster. So doing that and sending them back after what they've been doing for years and years and years, which was, high intensity effort. A lot of people put a lot of good work into it with the best intent, but it wasn't helping us to understand whether the investment was right. And so that was one of the things I changed pretty quickly. And they get to know pretty fast when you're saying you're not getting money. They get to know that that's something they need to get under control.
Yeah. When you get told no to money, you tend to change your tack fairly quickly, I've noticed.
Yeah, let's call it an accelerated learning environment, Rowan.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. But nonetheless, what I appreciated was that just the value of moving, the shifting from saying, hey, we know it and we've got signatures to prove it, versus, hang on a minute, what are the tests, and what is the posture that we should be taking as a leader to say, well, maybe we don't know it all. Let's get either more advice or the right advice. I love that.
For sure. Yeah.
Now, I want to move to this idea of, and you pick it up in your book. Your book is being published in the US at the end of the month, the No Bullshit Leadership, and I'd love you to talk about that at some point as well. But you pick up the idea of conflict, and you essentially you put a fairly significant stake in the ground, and you say, if you're a leader that cannot handle, deal, and navigate your way through conflict, you will stunt your leadership capabilities straight up. And you talk about that. And in our conversation leading up to today, we then sort of layered in the idea of the COVID world that we're living in and communication. And so I'd really love you to take those 3 ideas, that conflict idea, the communication idea, and the layer of the COVID world, and just to talk about what you're seeing, what you're hearing from leaders and clients, and what you're telling people that we need to be doing differently.
Well, let me start at the core, Rowan, which is at the conflict aversion piece. And I think I call this the number 1 career killer. As a leader, almost everything you do has the potential for some conflict, whether you're having a one-on-one conversation with one of your people, whether you're walking into a negotiation, which by its very nature is a construct which requires some level of conflict, whether you're contributing in a group forum, whether you're trying to build a high-performing team, you can't do any of that effectively unless you're comfortable in conflict. And everyone is to one degree or another. It's not black and white, of course. The ability to get comfortable with conflict says, I can do what I need to do at the point in time I need to do it because I'm not afraid. I'm not worried about what people think of me. I'm not fearful for the outcomes. I'm not anxious and apprehensive because I know that the most important thing is for me to step into this situation and handle it effectively. And this is one of those things that takes a fair bit of practice. But I focus very clearly on the one-on-one conversation piece because in my view, that's the hardest. That's the people, when you talk about having one-on-one conversations with the people who report to you, those are the conversations with the people who are closest to you. They're the ones that you want to have their respect, admiration, support, and love. They're the ones that you want to foster their positive regard for you. They're the people you deal with every day. You're closest to them. And it's also really easy to avoid. If you're not having difficult conversations with the people who report to you, no one's any the wiser except for you. And of course, ultimately in the long term, the results of the team are going to be substandard. So getting yourself to step into those situations is a mind game. And in my view, dealing with those situations is 90% will and 10% skill. You've got to work out how to get your head around it. And once you've got a reason that says, I'm actually going to step into this, I'm going to do this because it's the right thing. And I work with a number of different frames for looking through the problem to say, okay, this frame is going to motivate me to act. And one of my favorite frames, just for an example, is every person deserves the opportunity to improve. If you can see something about their performance or behavior and you don't let them know what that is, then you're robbing them of an opportunity to improve. And I'm absolutely, and I'm not going to use this word lightly, heartbroken by the people that I see late in their careers, 40, 50 years old, who've got an extraordinarily obvious flaw in what they're doing in terms of their performance or behavior. And no leader has ever had the courage to tell them. No leader. And so, I turn up and they're 50 years old and I go, hey, look, let's have a chat. Here's what I've observed. Here's why it's an issue. Here's what I think you need to be doing. I'm going to help you with it, but here's what the issue is and here's what you need to be doing. And they look at me as if to say, mate, my last 20 years of performance reviews say I'm an outstanding performer. So it's not me, it's you, which is sad because you can see something that's so obvious and it's limited their career, but no one's ever had the courage to tell them or no one's had the strength to tell them. And so for me, it's a big deal. Now, if you can master this one-on-one stuff, which you only do through repeated effort and trial and error, and as I like to say to people, it's only the first 200 or 300 conversations that are hard. After that, it starts to get easier. But if you could,
that would be, if that wasn't true, that would actually be funny. It is such a difficult thing to do and do well. I agree with you.
we get on the avoidance loop though, because we avoid and we avoid and we avoid and we avoid, and then when it comes to the crunch point where we can't avoid having that conversation because it's such a critical flashpoint, we walk in there fearing it. It goes really badly because we expect it to. And then we go out and we go, we've reinforced, I'm terrible at this. It's a horrible thing to do. I hate doing it. And then we're going to avoid again for another 100 years, right? So the thing about me, and fortunately as a leader, when I was a young leader, I had two things that really, really held me up. One of them was that I had just enough self-awareness to be able to see what was going on around me and to know where I was bad, which was useful. And the other thing was that I was so dysfunctional that I simply pushed everything else aside and said, oh, this is core. I can see how this affects leadership. I'm going to have to get good at it. So I'm going to throw myself into every conversation I need to have. And I just was a fanatic for any time I had to talk to anyone about anything, do it straight away, don't hesitate. And I was only kidding about 200 conversations. You do 10 of those, you'll start to feel better.
Yeah, sure. But nonetheless, what I'm hearing you say is it's basically it's making sure we're matching up our thinking and even that emotional check-in, because we can, the heart rate can get going. We can be upset. We can be triggered by what another person's saying. But you've actually said that it's the number one career limiter. So this is live right now. People will be watching this afterwards. I work for you, and you need to teach me. You need to give me feedback that could relate to conflict. Like take me through it, for instance, like in a sort of a 90-second version of what you learned to do really well. What kind of a conversation would you have with me to help me see what I can't see and then improve?
Right. What kind of a problem do you have, Rowan? Just fill me in here.
Where should we start? Where should we start?
Pick a topic. Pick a topic, and I'll go.
I've got a tendency to procrastinate on a couple of the things that are really important in terms of moving the needle in the area of the business that I'm responsible for.
Okay, great. Here we go. I've just called.
So they're taking too long.
Okay, yep. I've just called you into my office. Hey, Rowan, how's it going, mate?
I'm doing well, thanks, Smarty. Great to see you.
Good. You really think you're doing well? Shit, have I got news for you? No, I'm only kidding.
I set that up, so that's great.
You did.
My dad says lead with the glass jaw. So
yeah, absolutely. No, it has. No. What I would say, and let me get serious for a minute. What I would say is, how's that project going that you're working on? Because I noticed that you slipped a deadline last week. Is there something I need to know about, or is it something you've got under control?
And I would give you a rhetoric and a narrative about the fact that it's an excuse or it's okay. And and then.
Yeah. And then I go to pattern, right? So then what I want to say is.
Love it.
Can you see any pattern with this? Because just in my recent recollection, there's been 2 or 3 times where this has happened. And I don't know if it's a problem or not. Is there something that you're not getting in terms of your support? Are you resource shy? Is there something that I need to do to support you more? Or have you got everything you need? Because I think when we spoke a couple of months ago, we sort of said that you did have everything you need, and I'm not seeing the results come through. So can you just explain to me what's going on for you? So,
yeah, right.
So that's going to what I'm trying to do is draw you into the conversation so that you're part of it, right? I can give you a lecture and say, you missed a deadline, Rowan. That's unacceptable. That can't happen again, right? I can wag the finger, but that's not going to actually get me any better understanding of where you're up to. I'm not going to learn more about your capability, and you're not going to be able to explain what's going on in your head, which sometimes is all important. So, for example, I've had times when people have said to me in those circumstances, "Oh, look, Marty, I'm really sorry. I've got a lot going on at home at the moment. My father was just taken into palliative care 2 weeks ago. He hasn't got long. He's down in Adelaide. I'm thinking about trying to get to him, and it's so quite often you have people who are really good people who just have something going on in their lives that throws them off track for a little bit, and you need to know that as a leader. Many will say to you, "No, nothing, everything's okay," even though they've got that situation. But you've got to give people the opportunity to open up. Now, the thing with all of this is, these are not isolated conversations. If you're having them all the time as a routine way of the way you come into work and do your job as a leader, then none of this is surprising to the individual. None of it is intimidating, unless you have to get quite serious and it threatens their position. But what you're actually doing is having this ongoing leadership dialogue. And when you have to say something difficult, it's underpinned by the trust and empathy that comes with the long-term relationship that you have with them. And so that's why I always say, respect before popularity. Don't worry about being popular. That's not a goal. That's impossible. You'll fail at that. And as I like to say, every day when I walked into CS Energy, I knew that at least 5% of people hated me for no apparent reason. Many more hated me with good reason, but that 5%, they were never going to sway. So you're not going to be able to do that, right? And the higher up you get, the less people are going to agree with your decisions and like them, and the less people are going to agree with your philosophy and like it, because it's just the way the world works. So you've got to be okay with that. And then stepping into those conflict situations when you're very convinced that you need to do the right thing for the organization first, for the team second, and then for yourself as a leader, that's the way you actually build that trust, where people can see that your intent is pure, and they're much more likely to forgive you for the things they don't agree with. And so you can earn the respect of people, even if they aren't necessarily people who naturally, gravitate towards you.
In the work that I do with my business partner, Mike Hardy, we use a piece of IP from our consulting partners, Giant, and we call it the Support Challenge Matrix. And you just outlined that with just a real sense of elegance. But I wanted just to say to people watching this live or watching this afterwards, that piece around pattern right there, that is gold. So let me finish just not the conversation, but this part of the conversation. I want to talk about leading at level next. But the how do you bring me to the point where I look at you and make a commitment to change? Help me understand that and experience that. I'd love to understand how you do that.
Right. So like with anything else, what I'd say is my objective is to make it really, really clear what good looks like. I'm trying to show you what the requirements are for what I need from you, both in terms of the standard I need, the pace that I've got you going at, and how you deliver it. So I've got to make that crystal clear. And what I'm looking for is, Rowan, here's where we are at the moment, but I need you to be here. Now, do you understand the difference there? And we have a conversation so that tension is set up between current reality and future reality to the point where it's got to resolve itself one way or another. You can see clearly where you've got to get to. And I can say, Rowan, I need you here, mate. This is really important. For this role to be done properly and for you to be successful in this role, you've got to be able to achieve it at this level. And if you can't achieve it at this level, it might not be the right role for you. And we'll deal with that when we get to it. I want you to be successful, but you probably already know right now whether you think you can bridge that gap and whether you think you want to put in the effort to do it, because this is going to be a choice and you've got to make a decision about it. And so at this point in time where there is a clear and present gap, I'll be actually quite direct about that. And I think that in my view and experience, this is the kindest, most compassionate thing you can do for someone, is to make it really clear what they need to do to be successful, keep your eye on the scoreboard and let them know how they're going. And that's really the power of leading well. And not everyone's going to make that. Not everyone's going to choose to make that. In my experience, more than half of the people I'll have that conversation with will say to themselves, this is too hard. This isn't the right role for me. I better go and log on to seek.com.
Yeah, absolutely. But they do that not necessarily feeling like a failure or that they've been beaten up. They do that because they've been elegantly led to a place where they can decide whether or not they want to reach for that objective or reach for that standard. And so I just appreciate how you've articulated that with both your experience and your convictions around it. It's really, really useful. One of the things that resonated with me leading into this conversation and looking forward to your book being launched and various other things is that you actually tackle some of the things that we say about leadership, and then you go, but hang on a minute, they sound great, but they really don't work. And this piece around leading at level, I have really resonated with, because there's that underlying belief that the CEO should be there almost in rescuer mode, or the leader, the senior leader, however big the organization is. But you're actually very counterintuitive around that. So what's leading at level? What does it look like when it's happening poorly? And then what does it look like when we're actually doing it well?
Okay, Rowan. So this is probably one of the most common mistakes that I see leaders making at all levels, even at CEO level, in all sorts of organizations.
I think it's gold as an idea. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
And I've got to say, the definitive work on this is a book called The Leadership Pipeline, which was written by Ram Charam and Steve Drodder and Jim Knoll. And
great book.
And I had the pleasure and privilege of working very briefly with Steve Drodder at Horizon before the IPO there. And basically that talks about why each level exists. And if you're not working at the right level, the level you're paid to work at, then you're not doing the job you're paid to do. And every level has a unique set of objectives and deliverables and a unique time horizon. When I say time horizon, for example, if I'm working as an electrical fitter in a power station, my time horizon is today, this shift. When I turn up, what's my job task look like? How do I get through my job list effectively? How do I do a good job in terms of quality? That's my focus, right? My time horizon is today or this week. As a CEO, your time horizon should be out 5 years plus, depending on the size of the organization. I've got to think about the perpetuation of this organization. How do I make it profitable and sustainable into the future? So I'm supposed to be thinking 5 years out. Now, be that as it may, there were days in my CEO role that I couldn't think 5 hours out. And that happens, right? But you should always be bringing yourself back to what is your role? What is the time focus of your role? And what are you paid to do? You're paid to get outcomes here. Now, we have this concept called dipping down. When I do the work of someone below me, that's dipping down into their work. And the reason it's so seductive to do that for a leader, well, there are a number of reasons. One is, particularly the team leader in that first couple of layers of leadership when you get promoted, you're really in a situation where you want to keep your hand in technically. So you really want to do the things that you're comfortable with. I'm comfortable doing the technical work. If someone's struggling, I'm better at that work than they are because I got promoted, not them. I'll just get in and do it for them. I'll roll my sleeves up. Then I rationalize it by saying, I'm leading from the front and I always deliver, which is just bullshit, right? What it says is, I'm doing someone else's job because they're not doing it effectively. But I find that much easier to do than to stand back as a leader and expect that they step up to the standard they need to be producing. And so there's this concept of I can dip down and I can do their work for them. And by the way, every minute I spend there is a minute I'm not spending on my job where I'm supposed to be. And I'm doing that because that makes me feel good and it gets the job done and it covers up the weaknesses in the team. If I stay back at my level and my job is to lead that person to get them to come up to the mark and the standard that we need, that's a different proposition. That's a lot harder. It's heaps harder and it takes longer. And it's confronting because I've got to have those hard conversations. But if I don't do that, I will forever be down doing someone else's work. And the impact that has on culture is that everyone else is looking at it going, oh, that's the standard, is it? I can see this person over here who's a complete numpty and Marty just steps in and does their work for them. So I guess my reward for being really good at my job is that I get some of their work to do as well. Like that doesn't work. And so you create this culture of mediocrity and the really good people aren't going to stay there for that long. They'll be there for a little while and then they'll say, yeah, I'm sort of jack of this, I'm going to move on. So it has all sorts of nasty ramifications, but it's basically driven by the leader not wanting to have to do the leadership work, which is much harder than going in and doing the technical work.
Yeah. So we talk about this idea of having two jobs. Firstly, you've got the job that you're employed to do and you're paid to do, but then the one job we actually forget about is the job of leadership. And there's a transition in responsibility. There's a transition in career pathways where you actually go from the job of the job to the job of leadership. And it seems to me that there is in Mike and I do this work as well, there is a real gap in helping people understand that transition. So leaders who are leading at level well, what I'm picking up in some of the things that you're saying, Marty, is that there's very strong connections between these big ideas. And I know you capture it in the book, but if I'm not leading at level and I can't do conflict well, I am limiting my career, burning myself out, doing someone else's job, and ultimately not just probably feeling personally resentful, but being professionally unproductive. So,
in a nutshell, yep, absolutely right.
Yeah, I heard it. And Stephen's put in the comments here. Actually, it's my brother, Stephen. He said that leading at level really resonates. So, what would you say to a Stephen who goes, okay, here's how you change the leading at level process. Start by doing this, use this amount of time. What would you actually suggest to anybody at that level? Because it's not just, I'm fairly sure it's not a problem related exclusively to my family. So,
as I said, Rowan, it's probably the most common mistake that I see leaders making top to bottom in organizations at all levels. How do you start when you want to change this? Well, the first thing is the way you see yourself and identify. And this is probably the biggest psychological barrier to this is your identity. So we spend a lot of years learning how to become lawyers and doctors and, electricians and so forth. We spend a lot of years doing that. We study it a lot. We start working for an organization to learn the ropes. We become more and more proficient as time goes on. And then at some point in time, you've sort of got to let that go a bit. And you've got to be comfortable with saying, the thing that has most underpinned my value in the market up till now is the thing I now need to let go of. It's paradoxical. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens for a start when you first get promoted to being a team leader or a supervisor of a small team, where you only have one layer. That's the leader of others. When you go above that and you have leaders in between you and the work getting done, that's a leader of leaders. And that gets a whole lot, that's a whole different ballgame complex. But at that very first transition stage, you can actually develop the habit of making your people step into the vacuum that you leave. You can do that. Most don't. I certainly didn't. I overcompensated for my people terribly before I understood this concept, because it wasn't until I got a further promotion up and a further ladder away that I realized what the impact of this was. And was I going to step down through 2 layers and disempower the leader I had in between me and them? Well, that leader may as well not be there if I'm going to do that job too. And so I realized that the logistical inefficiency of all of this. And that's when it sort of occurred to me that actually leadership is a thing. It's not, I'm not just
Exactly.
this awesome software developer and project manager anymore. Like, leadership is a thing. And I like to do the graphic contrast between today and eventual outcome. So if today you're a first-time leader and you're leading a small team of people, well, just extrapolate out. You'll still want to hold on to your technical value, your market value for being a technician in your particular field. Cast yourself forward. What's your ambition? Do you want to be the CEO of a major business? Well, guess what? At some point between here and here, you're going to have to let go of a whole lot of shit. Because as a CEO of an organization, you're not going to be deep in everything. You're not going to be deep in asset management, in finance, in economics, in law, in governance. You can't possibly. What you need to do is accept the fact that as you go up, you go from being an inch wide and a mile deep to being a mile wide and an inch deep.
Yeah.
And the
big
transition.
change.
Yeah. And what a lot of people do is they mushroom cloud, as I like to call it.
Mm.
So they come up the stream as, for example, a finance person, and they work their way up and they become a CFO. And then all of a sudden, because CFOs know the business, they quite often get promoted to CEO roles. And then all of a sudden you get this and the mushroom cloud. They've got to get across all this stuff and they have no idea and they struggle. And so I think the earlier you can get used to the fact that you've got to be multidisciplinary, you've got to think of things that are outside of your particular domain. That's what makes you promotable. That's what makes you effective as a leader who's going up instead of a leader who's focused inwards and downwards. And that's the sort of thing that's going to really enable your team, because the positive impact on the team, which I haven't spoken about yet, is that once you expect them to step up and fill the vacuum, they start to perform. They start to see that they can have impact on their own. And for the people who want to do that, you'll elevate their performance. And it really does wonders for the best performers in your team. So you end up spending 80% of your time with the best performers, not the worst.
So useful. Thank you so much. One of the conversations, just as we land this, and I appreciate your time, and it's morning in Melbourne, Australia, it's evening in Boston. And the very fact that we can do this way, I think is brilliant.
Yeah, cool.
Is there something I haven't asked you that would be a really value add to the people that will that are either listening or will listen to this conversation? And then I want to land by talking about your book.
Okay, well, the one thing that I'd say, and I talk about this as being my my favorite component of the leadership framework, is drive accountability. And I think a lot of organizations develop a culture of all care and no responsibility. And that's because they spread deliverables across too many people. And yes, a lot of people in a lot of different teams obviously need to be involved in complex deliverables, but there's always got to be a single accountable person. And I talk about one head to pat, one ass to kick. You release a completely different energy, and you have a completely different outlook when you have individual accountability, where people know that they are the ones who are carrying the can for something. Now, it can be quite frightening at first, particularly if your company has currently a low accountability culture. And this is why we temper it with empowerment. And so the flip side of that same coin of accountability is empowerment. And you can't have one without the other. But if you can actually learn how to empower your people, and by that, I don't just mean you're empowered, go off and do what you want to do. I mean, make the objectives super clear, make sure they understand how they're going to create value, give them air cover so that they don't get all this extraneous shit flying in onto their work program, make sure they're resourced appropriately, make sure you're available to coach and mentor them, make sure they have decision-making rights, like all of those things that give them true empowerment. Once you give them that and you start to create this no blame, no excuses culture, that's when you really see execution take off. And that, if you did nothing else as a leader, that will improve your results by an order of magnitude. So I absolutely believe that. So I think that really strong accountability, we don't like doing it because we have to stretch people for that. And we also have to risk them not liking us if we push them too hard. So we'll try to wriggle out from under that. But that's the one thing that I think in terms of value delivery and execution is a no-brainer. So if you can do that, that's awesome. And of course, the book goes into much more detail about how to do that.
Yeah, and so I mean, we obviously were championing the book, and the podcast is extraordinarily successful. A little over 2 years old, 1.5 million downloads. The book comes out at the end of the month. Tell us a little bit about the why of the book and who benefits from it. And I think because it's worth celebrating. You've worked so hard to get it to this point, and we want to champion that with you.
Yeah, and thanks very much, Rowan. I really appreciate those words. I think for us, the decision, and this is my business partner Emma Green and I, our decision to actually go to the US market was a big one, and we didn't make it lightly. And she's remaining in Australia. But the thing for us is our purpose is really clear. It's to improve the quality of leaders globally. And we're already achieving that to a large extent with the podcast because we're in over 70 countries. And as you say, we get a lot of downloads. We get into a whole lot of different people's heads in different industries and different parts of the world. And so that to us is success. And we get so many emails from people writing back and saying, "You've changed my life. My life as a leader was hell. I hated it. And now it makes sense, or now I've got confidence to do something different." And it doesn't take many of those emails to reaffirm exactly why we're here. And so going to the big market in the US obviously was a long-term plan because we want to hit the bigger markets. We want to paint on a bigger canvas and be able to reach more leaders no matter what we do. So we're investing very heavily in it, of course. And, obviously it's an adventure for me, leaving Australia behind and coming over here, but it's what we need to do. It's our way of having impact and creating a better leadership world, because this happens one leader at a time, right? It happens one leader at a time. And we've all worked for bad leaders in the past, and we know what that feels like. And I want to create a world where no leader wants to be that one. That's the sort of world I want to see in the future. So everything we do is geared towards that. And one of our favorite expressions is that income follows impact. So it's got to be the right thing for us. If we can impact enough people, then everything else flows from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, Australians are probably we're not naturally great at really elevating people and saying you go for it. Americans are probably they're probably naturally ideologically they lean towards that. But I, for one, want to say that I hope you achieve the goal of improving the quality of leaders globally. I think that is a worthwhile and a noble pursuit. We certainly, one of the experiences Mike and I have had over the last 18 months is we've gone, well, why shouldn't the world be our marketplace? Why shouldn't the globe be our marketplace? So this week we've got conversations with Australia, America, and the UK, and there's no reason that we shouldn't reach for that. And I think not only do you believe you should do it, but you've actually relocated to do it. So personally and professionally, Marty, I champion you. Thank you so much for the conversation. And not just for the people that have tuned in live, but the people that will benefit from it afterwards. If people want more, we've got it on the ticker there, Your CEO Mentor, www.yourceomentor.com/book. And they can pretty much find you on your website. Is there any closing remarks that you'd like to say? And thank you.
No, the only thing I want to say, Rowan, and I really appreciate you having me on. It's been a great conversation, so thank you very much for that. The only thing I want to say, I want to just highlight the dedication in the book. And the dedication is for every leader with the courage to be better. And the reason I say that is because it's easy to listen to the feel-good stuff and to feel motivated and inspired and then go away and do nothing. And as a leader, it's really the action that counts, which is why all of my pillars of leadership are imperative statements, deliver value, handle conflict, etc. So what I'd say is for anyone listening, for anyone who you can talk to, have the courage to be better. Have the courage to make the changes that you need to make to yourself and how you do things, because it's not going to be easy. Just make sure that when you run into those problems, double down, go again, because eventually stand up one day and you'll find you've got a team who loves working for you, who's producing results hand over fist, and you're loving life. So have the courage to be better, guys, and really appreciate the time you spent listening.
Thanks so much for your time today, Marty. We really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Rowan. Cheers, mate.